News First Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
What we see today did not begin today. It is the result of a systematic policy carried out through the ages to ensure unity is defeated and disunity reigns eternal. But ultimately, who has been the victor and who has been the defeated? It is against this backdrop that we must consider 1983. The rioting that occurred on the city streets and villages in almost every part of Sri Lanka resulted in untold bloodshed that lasted an entire generation. The cost in terms of property can perhaps be calculated, but who can calculate the loss of precious life and the cost of opportunity? It was the government's responsibility at the time to ensure law and order was maintained, but it did not. The very government that the people trusted to protect them turned away, and a nation bled for decades. Today, the incidents of the past few days in Kandy are signs of a sinister attempt to ensure that the seeds of hate are sown back into the tightly knit fabric of our communities. The troublemakers and rabble-rousers will set alight our fears and then leave. Who will be there to pick up the pieces? Who will repair the damage done to another generation? Who will fight the wars and battles of the future? Who will rebuild our economy and keep the home fires burning? Who will take care of our sick and wounded? Who will take responsibility for our children's futures? Certainly not the troublemakers roaming the streets today. They will disappear, leaving us all with a wrecked nation and lost opportunity. But today, we the people can be proud. Despite the instigating and sponsored racism, our nation has held itself together, especially last night. We must recognize the strength, unity and love our people have for each other. One must also recognize and salute the President and the government for taking swift action and stemming this right at the outset. We must honor our security forces and the police for doing their duty by the people and for protecting us against the vile attempts of a few. What we do today will have repercussions not just on us, but on our children and theirs. We must therefore seize this opportunity to renew our commitment to a strong and united Sri Lanka. And we must, together in one single voice, discard and reject everything that will retard our nation's right to happiness and prosperity.
Well, good morning. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And that was our special statement from Newsfirst on the events of the last few days. The curfew has been lifted and things are getting back to normal, which is excellent news. And this morning on Newsline, we've got we're going to look at certain timelines and certain specific instances that people are talking about in the world of the bond. Thought you'd get away with that? No, because it's still very much a subject that is alive and doing its rounds and still remains a source of great concern to this country. And joining me is Newsfirst's very own Zulfiq Farzan. Very good morning.
Good morning, Faraz.
How the devil are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Good, good. Now then, Zulfiq, in between, I'm concerned, as are many viewers, are concerned that various events are sort of almost conspiring to drive the bond under the carpet. Do you think that it will be driven under the carpet? Or is it making progress?
Well, from what you say, because it seems to be there are attempts to drive it under the carpet. However, we saw the investigations done by the Criminal Investigations Department themselves following a complaint made by the Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy. Now, based on those investigations, We now have people like Arjun Aloysius and Kasun Palisena in remand custody, and the former central bank governor Arjun Mahendran has been given notice to appear before the CID director to provide a statement regarding these investigations. So the matter is very much alive for us.
I see. Just to let some of our listeners, viewers, know, we've got an issue with our broadband, and so therefore we are unable to go live on Facebook. Thank you. Now then, Zulfik, but that's the nature of news, though, isn't it? Because you have, not that one is less important than the other, but news is fast, it's rapid, and the very essence of a successful news team is to catch all that news and put it out to the public, isn't it? So therefore, when you have other matters happening as well, it does give sort of the impression that the bond is forgotten about.
I don't think that the bond will be forgotten anytime sooner for us, because the cases are coming up regarding Arjun Aloysius and Kasun Palisena, as well as Arjun Mahendran, taken up at the 4th Magistrate. Now they are remanded until next week, that is the 15th, when the case will be taken up again, and that's when further submissions will be made regarding Arjun Mahendran, because if I'm not mistaken, he should appear before the CID director on the 8th, that's tomorrow.
I see. Now, Zulfik, all this means that the world, the legal fraternity, the economy within the legal fraternity is doing pretty well. Thank you very much. There's a lot of money there.
Indeed, if you
it's driving that. The fees must be high.
Well, there are some speculated rumors that we've also heard about the legal fees on this, but we cannot be certain for sure.
Yeah.
However, when you take a look at the recommendations made by the Presidential Commission, one of the key recommendations was the money that was spent for the Commission to operate, especially when it comes to the payment of the employees who are there, the usage of machinery, paper. So, hundreds of boxes of A4 paper were used for this commission. So
because the final thing was around over 10,000 pages.
Indeed. And making copies of that also would cost a lot of money. So I think all those monies would be recovered from these parties in question.
But that's a little bit rich, though, because in the event that they're found guilty, then it's our money.
Indeed.
It was our money in the first place anyway. So it's a little bit of a sort of bitter pill to swallow. I'd prefer it to have, sometimes in libel cases, they get you to pay a deposit up front before you can carry on. But I suppose that's one of the downsides of trying to have a level playing field. But Zulfik, I thought we'd just remind, because sometimes people say that, oh, this is over so boring, and you're going on and on about this thing. The reason that we're going on and on about it is because some experts have estimated that in the next 15 years alone, the bond is going to cost this country, it's going to cost Sri Lanka, you, me, Zulfik, and everybody else, at least 600 billion over the next so many years. It's not chicken feed. It's a serious amount. When you consider that we could have paid for the Hambantota port had we needed it, and Maktala airport had we needed that too, and the extension to the the Southern Expressway, could have all been paid with this money without borrowing a single cent, a red cent. Tamba Sateak, as Malik Samaravikrama unfortunately referred to it as, had this thing not happened. So, but Zulfik, let's remind people of the timelines. February 26th, 2015. What a disastrous day that was. Marked for the
infamous breakfast meeting.
The breakfast meeting. I wonder what they ate. at that breakfast meeting?
Even I have no clue for us what they ate, but the matter that was discussed at that meeting was, according to what the witnesses have said, is regarding the stalled road development projects. We had former central bank governor who started off by saying that the government was mainly focused on making payments for these unsolicited road development projects done by the previous regime. And that was followed on with the statements by Ravi Kaunanayake, Kabir Hashim and Malik Samarawikrama. However, when we had Malik Samarawikrama and Kabir Hashim testify at the commission, they testified that the matter of the bond or raising monies to the auction on the next day was never discussed. And they said the only thing that happened was they met for the breakfast meeting based on the instructions of the Prime Minister following a cabinet subcommittee on economic affairs, that meeting, which happened earlier that week. And following that only they met at the central bank to discuss this figure where Kabir Hashim and Malik Samarawikrama say it was somewhere between 15 billion rupees and 18 billion rupees. However, what contradicts is during the proceedings of the commission, one of Aushan Mahendan's attorneys produced a very crisp document, which is that document also was scrutinized by the Attorney General's Department for its crisp
because
nature.
The crisp nature of the sheet of paper.
Indeed. That is, the question was, if the document was issued in 2015, how is it that it's in brand new?
Yes, like this one. This is probably only 24 hours old, probably.
Yes,
right? And it doesn't look crisp. It looks used.
Indeed.
But what was the explanation? How were Mr. Mahendan?
Well, Mr. Mahendan's explanation for that was the document he believed was very, very important to him. And so he kept it under air-conditioned environment.
Oh, really?
Yes. And the content of this document, he said it's at his residence.
But this is a state document.
Indeed. And
it's
the
not
content,
his personal property.
The content is what's really astounding for us, because in that document it says it's from the Minister of Finance back then, Ravi Kaunanayake. No date.
So undated.
Undated.
Did it have a reference, file reference number?
No, there was no reference number, there was no file number. It only related to urgent need of 75 billion rupees. That
75?
75
not
billion.
Not 15, not 18?
Not 18. That is where the main question started to come out. What is the figure that you discussed? And that's when Malik Samarawikrama and Kabir Hashim were called in to testify, and they said somewhere between 15 and 18.
Right. So, but then all that, and in between we have Ravi jumping in and issuing that letter. It has not been disputed that he had issued the letter. And what has not been successfully explained, of course, is that the letter is undated and unreferenced. And also, Zulfi, it appeared to me that this letter wasn't in the format that ordinary letters from the ministry will flow out. This format, you know, they'll have the address here and it's in here and the subject in the center or whatever it is. It seemed odd, the layout. But more important than everything else was the later testimony of the Deputy Secretary Treasury, Mr. Artikala. What did he have to tell the Commission under oath?
That is one of the most interesting testimonies that we came across while in the Commission. Mr. Artikala, he was asked what the process of raising money, how the Treasury does that. So he gave a very lengthy, detailed description of how it's done. And then the question was posed to him, if there's an additional requirement, it was not said that this 15 billion was an additional requirement to him. He said, if there was an additional requirement, what do the Treasury do? That is when he said, if there's an additional requirement, it has to come to the Treasury, and then the Treasury would then see how it can be done, and then they would inform the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. However, in February 2017, especially on the 27th of February 2015, sorry, I beg your pardon, 2015, on that auction day, before that and after that, the Treasury Secretary said there was no such requirement whatsoever from the Ministry or the Central Bank that came to them.
Now, we better explain this very quickly because we've got a break coming up, but very quickly, when a government department, like let's say the Road Development Authority, wants to pay a bill, all they do is they write to the line minister and say, we need this amount of money, we don't have it, or you must send it to us, or whatever. The line minister will then forward it to the Minister of Finance, who passes it down to the Treasury Secretary. It is that department, which is an extensive department, that knows the requirement of government of the day. It is they who instruct, if they don't have enough funds, who instruct the central bank to procure that amount of money. The central bank is merely the agent, the broker. That's all they are. They will then borrow the money on behalf of the government, on behalf of the Treasury, and it will be supposed to be, by law at any rate, the least cost method of raising the funds. Just for the record, the raising of funds, borrowing of money, the procuring of the funds to run government is the largest single purchase regularly undertaken by any government in this country. On that note, we go for a break. We'll come right back.
First Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Welcome back to Newsline, where we're discussing the critical timelines of the bond scheme or the bond scam. Now then, there are some messages which we'll go through in right now. One person says, so if it's the people's money, why don't they all get together and sue everyone responsible? Good point, Miss or Sir. Good point, and I'm sure the people will be moved if the legal processes that are going through now slow down for some unexplained reason. Another one says here, the Parliament debate on the bond matters were postponed, awaiting the report in Tamil and Sinhalese. How is this going? That's something for you. How is that going, the translation of the report?
Well, first, if you take a look at the report itself, the report itself contains 1,530 plus pages,
Yeah.
and then you have the annexures which go amount to more than 10,000.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see why there should be a very long delay, but I hope the papers will come out, the translations will come out very soon, so we can have this debate.
The Ministry of Languages, they're doing that, isn't it?
It's done by the government printer, has to print it.
Right. So, now then, there's another question. Let's take one else here. Both elephant and mahout have gone wild and on rampage. Should the elephant or replace the mahout? Well, thank you. But, keep sending your questions. And another one says, how about Ravi K? Are you letting him off? We are not letting anyone off. We are merely going through the timelines. Right, so now let's get this right. 26th of February 2015, breakfast meeting, discussed the matters, contention about whether it was 15, 18 or 75 billion, undated, unreferenced letter that came to life sometime thereafter, right? And then the requirement, they say was 15 or 18. They, as in the minister in charge of the subject of the highways, right? And the party chairman, who was not even a minister then, or an elected anything, or appointed, he was the advisor to the Prime Minister, so they say. Anyway, so they then decide to raise ₹1 billion. That was obviously what the Treasury told their broker, the central bank, to raise, because it is the Treasury who knows the requirements of the government. And the $1 billion was advertised.
Yes.
But it later transpired that because of the huge overspill, the huge take-up, usually it's oversubscribed by, once, twice. It's always usually oversubscribed. Now, the central bank governor decided to take up 20 billion. But one, Mrs. Deepa Senimiratna
And Dr.
Azim were horrified at this prospect because the rate also was rather high. It was about 3 basis points higher than the prevailing rate.
Yes.
And they would have been mindful, Dr. Azim and so on, especially Dr. Azim, because Mrs. Senimiratna was in charge of public debt department. But everybody else would have been mindful that there was a 4 trillion debt, public debt, and that any rise in the lending rate for every 1% you'd have to pay 40, right? 40 billion.
Yes.
Now then, in that knowledge, and in light of the opposition to the take-up of 20 billion by the governor of the central bank, the governor said, oh, all right, then take 10. But it was 10 times more than what was advertised. And it was half of what he really wanted to take, which is 20.
Indeed.
But God bless her, Mrs. Selvi Ratna made a note on the margins of that thing to say that the governor done that. Right, so then they took this up. But tell us, out of the 10 billion, how much did perpetual treasuries get?
Well, they had quite an amount inside that, because they had also Bank of Ceylon bid on behalf of them.
A proxy bid.
I think about 5 billion.
5 billion. So in total, they got about 5 billion.
That's like half of the 10 billion right there.
Yes.
But if they went for the entire 10 billion, a perpetual treasury would have even more.
Indeed, indeed.
Sorry, the entire 20
billion.
billion. However, now when you accept that 10 billion, thanks to Dr. Azim, it was cut down to 10 billion.
Yeah.
And when it was taken to the tender board, that's where another important incident happened.
Yeah.
The Public Debt Department informs the tender board that this amount we advertise only for 1 billion. We can take our initial recommendation was 2.68 billion, which is normally that's how it happens. You take at least 1 or 2 billion more.
Yeah.
But this 10 times more. It was the governor who instructed us, and then we had the deputy governor back then, P. Samarasiri, according to the witnesses who were there at the tender board, who said Mr. Samarasiri spoke to the governor outside via phone and asked him the reasons. And then after that he came back and said, okay, we have to do this. And that's when the 10 billion was accepted, and around 5+ billion going to perpetual treasury.
That was the start of the disaster.
Yeah.
Now then,
and first, what needs to be mentioned is at that time the prevailing market rate was somewhere between 9.38%.
yes, no, 9.85 was they gave an indicator.
An indicative rate.
Yes.
We also heard requests for indicative rates for the telephone conversations from the BOC
right,
and other dealers. So when
And these are standard practices.
these are standard practices.
Yeah.
The central bank does not give out the rate. They just say, you can check the market and bid.
Yeah.
But the problem is here, when you're bidding, there is a mandatory 100 million that every bidder has to make.
Right.
So let's say you are a bidder and you don't have the money.
Yeah.
You go for a dummy bid.
Right.
So you would place a bid for 100 million or 100+ million for a rate that is very higher, which you in your understanding would know the central bank would not accept. It will be written off. It will be cut out.
Yeah.
However, from inside this 10 billion were dummy bids.
Right.
So we had testimonies from certain primary dealers who came and said, we put dummy bids because we did not expect the rate to rise up at this level, and we suffered a loss.
Yeah.
So you have that aspect as well.
So they took this up, and 50 billion, 10 billion, 10 times more than was what they. You see, the point here to bear in mind is that it is not what the Minister of Highways or the chairman of the RDA or anything like that. It's not them who are the deciding factor. It is the Treasury Secretary.
Yes.
Not even the Minister of Finance. We must drum this point home. It is the Treasury that raises the money, and it is they who knows everything. Right now, the Treasury would know how much at the end of this month is payable by the government in terms of contracts, salaries, expenses, petty cash, the whole lot.
Because for us there's a streamlined process. There's a very important document called the cash flow statement.
That's right. So like in any business, they have a cash flow statement. It's the accounts department, not the marketing manager who knows this. It is the accounts. And the accounts is, in terms of national affairs, it's the Treasury. Right. Now then, when led by the Sunday Times on that Sunday, soon after the bond, there was a little article, and then Newsfirst expanded on that, and there was some concern.
Yes.
By the 8th of March 2015, there was huge concern, significant concern, led by dare we say, News First. And this matter was considered so important that the Prime Minister decided to make a special statement in Parliament about this. And that was the 17th of March. And in there, he said what, Tawfiq?
Well, he said he appointed a committee led by Gawini Pitipada, a lawyer who is affiliated to the United National Party.
Yeah.
And that committee has found that Arjuna Mahendran did no wrong. But however, there's one important statement that he made. He stressed on one fact, that he insisted, and I'm quoting the words of the Prime Minister, he insisted to go for a public auction system, claiming that the direct place method, the method used before, was marred with lack of transparency.
Yes, and he then said, this is what the primary dealers are saying. He didn't specify who they were, even though he was speaking within the sanctity of Parliament, and with that sort of protection, if you like. And so the Prime Minister said, I insisted.
Yes.
And the Prime Minister is a trained lawyer, and he obviously knew the meaning and the implications of the word insisted. It was later proven during the court proceedings conducted by Dev Gunasekara in the chair that Mr. Arjuna Mahendran also confirmed that. He said, I only did as per the instructions of the Prime Minister. Well, there you have that. Now then, in further testimony, during the Commission proceedings, the Prime Minister said that he said that whilst he insisted, he also said that he didn't expect, or I think he said that he accepted, he expected that the procedure to achieve that would have been followed by Arjuna Mahendran. Clearly, it wasn't. But he also said something else. He spoke about the conflict of interest. He said before he appointed Arjuna Mahendran, he had this chat with him, and he wanted Mr. Mahendran to disassociate the son-in-law from that business, the management and running that company.
Yes.
The Prime Minister, very unfortunately, and this is the problem here, even on the 8th of March, when by the time we reported, and even before he came to Parliament on the 17th, he did not check whether Arjuna Mahendran had kept to his instructions and to the word. He assured him that he would do that. He could, the Prime Minister, the Minister in charge of the subject, he could have summoned the Register of Companies, for example, and checked up. That person would have been obliged to bring the files and come to see the Prime Minister, instead of the Prime Minister sending somebody there, right? Now, he didn't do that, and for a trained lawyer, I find that quite unacceptable. Because if he was my lawyer, and if I was on the other side and hiring him to represent me, I'd be very upset with him, and I'd report him to the Law Society because he failed, right? So that's the problem. So there we have, in a nutshell. And of course, then we must remember what happened because of that inaction. They did 2 more bonds, didn't they? A year later.
2 more bonds that we know of. There's issues regarding that's in 2016.
Yeah.
And a comment made by the Attorney General's Department during the hearings of the Commission was if the 2015 bond was looked into, we wouldn't have suffered a major loss in 2016 as well. Because whereas when the Prime Minister says that he asked Arjuna Mahendran to ensure that Arjuna Aloysius is not involved in the daily operations of perpetual treasuries while he is governor, call recordings obtained from the recording system from perpetual treasuries itself, which was handed over to the Attorney General's Department by a state's witness, an employee from that company. The Attorney General's Department highlighted that even though Arjuna Mahendran promised the Prime Minister that he would ensure that Arjuna Aloysius would disassociate himself from the operations, it was clear that Aloysius was in fact involved in the decision-making process of that company, even during when Mahendran was the governor.
And if you examine our footage, you'll realize that even though that assurance had purportedly been given, and when we analyze the time frames, you'll find that on the central bank website at that time, even after this concern was raised by the media and so on, the email address for perpetual treasuries was the address used by Arjun Aloysius.
Yes.
And it is after we pointed it out on one of our earlier reports that it suddenly disappeared from there. But Zulfikar Farzan, you know, half an hour has gone by, but very quickly, can you tell us, you've got all the insight, because you've made a bit of a name for yourself as the person on the spot and following all that, and you must have had expanded your network of information and so on. Tell me two things. One, what do you think was on that telephone that fell in the swimming pool in Singapore? And two, have you got any inside information about Arjuna Mahendran?
Well, for us, the phone that reportedly fell in Singapore, we don't know the contents of that.
Right.
And however, the phone that was used after that by Arjun Aloysius was recovered, and then material was extracted, and that's when we...
That was explosive.
That was explosive. We got the calls,
Yeah.
and how many calls were made to certain individuals.
They should have used a pigeon, really. But now, come on.
And then
last point. Have you got any inside information about Arjuna Mahendran?
With regard to Arjun Mahendran, what I can say is what was revealed in court itself, that when the courier service went to his residence, he was not there, and so they can't...
But a chap called Lakshman answered the phone.
Yes, so they had given the number to the Singapore agent of this courier service,
Yeah.
and they had called the mobile number of Arjun Mahendran, and then a person called Lakshman had answered the phone and said that he'll be coming back to Singapore on the 30th.
Zulfikar Farzan, thank you very much. But before we finish, let me tell you, Arjuna Mahendran's full name is Lakshman Arjuna Mahendran. On that note, take care. God bless.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.